Hi everyone, we're back with a new scary Roblox story. Believe me, this one is really scary, and we connected it again to the start of the school. And this time, it's about to the game Steal a Brainrot on Roblox. As always, not all of our stories are based on true events, but some are. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the story, if you dare. Before we start the story, another shout out to Ariane and a shout out to Hannah. Thanks to you all for watching our podcast. Steve walked through the school hallway with his backpack bouncing on his shoulders. Summer vacation was over, and everyone was talking about what they did during the break. But Steve had spent most of his time reading books and helping his mum in the garden. He felt a little left out when he heard his friends talking excitedly near the lockers. "Dude, you have to try it," Jake was saying to Mike and Tommy. "It's called Steal a Brainrot, and it's the coolest game on Roblox right now." "Yeah," Mike agreed, adjusting his glasses. "I played it all night yesterday. You collect these weird creatures and steal them from other players. It's so fun." Tommy nodded eagerly. The Brainrots look so strange and funny. There's one called Tung Tung Sahur that looks like a tiger with sneakers, and another one called Tralalero Tralala that's like a shark with legs. Steve moved closer to the group. "What kind of game is it?" he asked. "It's this tycoon game where you walk around and collect these AI-made creatures," Jake explained. "But here's the cool part. You can steal other players' brainrots if you're sneaky enough. Then they chase you and try to get them back." "Sounds interesting," Steve said, though he wasn't sure if he wanted to steal things from other players. "You should totally play it tonight," Mike suggested. "We could all meet up in the same server and play together." Steve smiled. "Okay, I'll try it. But I'll probably need to use a private server because my internet is really slow at home." "No problem," Tommy said. "Private servers work great for that game anyway." That evening, Steve sat at his computer desk in his small bedroom. The walls were covered with posters of his favorite books and movies. He opened Roblox and searched for Steal a Brainrot. The game had millions of visits and thousands of players online. The thumbnails showed colourful, weird-looking creatures that made Steve chuckle. "These look pretty silly," he said to himself as he clicked to join the game. The loading screen showed dancing, brainrot creatures while upbeat music played. Steve used some of his saved Robux to buy a private server so he wouldn't have to deal with lag or disconnections. His internet was always slow in the evenings when everyone in the neighborhood was online. When the game finally loaded, Steve found himself standing in a large, open area with a long conveyor belt running down the middle. Strange music was playing. It sounded like a mix between a carnival tune and something you might hear in a spooky movie. The sky was a weird purple color, and there were 8 small base areas scattered around the map. Steve's avatar appeared in one of the transparent cage-like bases. It was like a glass house, where everything inside could be seen from outside. He could see the other bases too, but they all looked empty. "Weird," Steve muttered. "I thought I was alone in this private server." He walked to the edge of his base and looked at the conveyor belt. Colourful creatures were slowly moving along it, each one stranger than the last. There were shark cats, tiger sneakers, cow aliens, and many others that didn't seem to make any sense. Steve noticed a notification in the corner of his screen. "Players in server, 2. 2 players," Steve said out loud. "But I bought a private server. How is someone else here?" He looked around the map carefully, checking each of the 8 bases, but he couldn't see any other player avatars anywhere. Maybe it was just a glitch. Roblox had bugs sometimes. Steve walked closer to the conveyor belt and saw a creature that made him laugh. It was called Tung Tung Sahur and looked exactly like Tommy had described. "That's actually kind of cute," Steve said, reaching out to click on it. As soon as his cursor touched the Tung Tung Sahur, a voice came through his speakers. It was clear and close, like someone was sitting right next to him. "What are you doing?" Steve jumped back from his computer, his heart racing. The voice sounded like a kid about his age, but there was something cold about it. "Leave me alone," the voice continued, "or I will chase you." Steve quickly looked at the chat box, but there were no messages there. He checked the player list again. It still showed 2 players, but only his username was visible. The other player slot just showed. "This must be voice chat," Steve said, trying to calm down. But Roblox NPCs don't usually talk like that. He moved his avatar away from the tung tung sahur, and the voice stopped. Steve stood there for a moment, looking around the empty bases again. Where was this other player, and why couldn't he see them? Steve's hands were shaking slightly as he reached for his mouse. Maybe this was some new feature in the game that his friends hadn't mentioned, or maybe it was just a very realistic NPC, but something felt wrong. The voice had sounded so real, so personal, like someone was actually watching him and talking directly to him. Steve quickly closed the game and shut down Roblox. His bedroom suddenly felt very quiet without the strange carnival music. He looked out his window at the dark street below. A few streetlights cast long shadows between the houses. "I'll ask the guys about this tomorrow," he said to himself. Maybe they know what that was about. But as he got ready for bed, Steve couldn't stop thinking about that voice. "Or I will chase you," it had said. What did that mean? Chase him where? It was just a game, right? The next morning at school, Steve found his friends eating lunch in the cafeteria. He sat down with his tray and immediately started telling them about his weird experience. "So I was trying to buy this tung tung sahur thing," Steve explained, "and suddenly I heard this voice saying I should leave it alone or it would chase me, but there was no other player visible anywhere." Jake started laughing and nearly choked on his sandwich. "Dude, you're making that up." "No, I'm serious," Steve insisted. The player list showed 2 people, but I could only see my own avatar. And the voice came through voice chat, but NPCs don't use voice chat. Mike shook his head with a grin. "Steve, we've all played that game tons of times. Nothing like that has ever happened to any of us." "Maybe you accidentally joined a regular server instead of a private one," Tommy suggested. "And there was an invisible hacker or something." "But I definitely bought a private server," Steve said. "I used my own Robux." The 3 friends exchanged glances and started giggling. "Come on, Steve," Jake said. "You're probably just trying to make the game sound scarier than it is. We know you like horror stories and stuff." "I'm not making it up," Steve said, his voice getting louder. A few other students at nearby tables turned to look. Okay, Mike said, still smiling. "Even if something weird did happen in the game, it's probably just a bug. Roblox has glitches all the time." Tommy nodded. "Yeah, and besides, you're such a noob at this game. You probably just clicked the wrong thing or something." Steve felt his face get hot with embarrassment and frustration. His friends didn't believe him at all. They thought he was either lying or just too inexperienced to understand what had happened. "Fine," Steve said. "Tonight I'm going to record everything while I play. Then you'll see I'm telling the truth." "Sure," Jake said with a smirk. "We can't wait to see your evidence." Steve spent the rest of the school day feeling annoyed. His friends were supposed to support him, not make fun of him, but he was determined to prove that something strange had really happened in the game. After school, Steve walked home through his neighborhood. He lived about 10 blocks away from school, and he always took the same route. Down Main Street, left on Oak Avenue, then through the small park with the playground, and finally down his own street, Maple Lane. The sun was setting, and the sky was turning orange and pink. Steve liked this time of day because everything looked peaceful and quiet. Most people were inside having dinner or watching TV, but as Steve walked through the park, he started hearing footsteps behind him. They were heavy and slow, like someone wearing big boots or sneakers. Steve looked over his shoulder but didn't see anyone. The footsteps continued. Step, step, step. They seemed to match his own pace, but they sounded much heavier. Steve walked a little faster. The footsteps behind him also got faster. Now Steve was starting to feel scared. He turned around completely and looked back at the path through the park. There was no one there. The playground was empty, and the trees cast long shadows in the evening light. But the footsteps were still there. Steve turned back around and started walking even faster. His heart was beating hard in his chest. As he got closer to the park exit, he heard the footsteps getting louder and faster too. Finally, Steve couldn't help himself. He spun around one more time to see what was following him. What he saw made his blood turn ice cold. A giant Tung Sahur was standing about 20 feet behind him. It was the same brainrot character from the game, but it was huge. Its glowing eyes were staring directly at Steve. For a moment, neither Steve nor the creature moved. They just looked at each other in the dim light of the park. Then the Tung Sahur took a step forward. Steve didn't wait to see what would happen next. He turned and ran as fast as he could toward the park exit. Behind him, he could hear the creature's heavy footsteps pounding on the ground as it chased after him. Steve knew his neighborhood better than anyone. He had lived here his whole life and had explored every street, alley, and shortcut. As soon as he got out of the park, he took a sharp right turn into a narrow alley between two houses. The alley was barely wide enough for one person, and Steve squeezed through it as quickly as he could. He could hear the Tung Sahur trying to follow, but it was too big to fit through the narrow space. Steve could hear it growling and scratching at the walls of the alley. Steve ran through 3 more narrow alleys and side streets until he finally reached Maple Lane. He ran all the way to his house, quickly unlocked the front door, and slammed it shut behind him. "Steve!" his mum called from the kitchen. "Is that you? You're home early." "Yeah, Mom," Steve called back, trying to sound normal. His heart was still pounding and he was breathing hard. I wanted to get started on my homework." "Okay, honey. Dinner will be ready in an hour." Steve ran upstairs to his room and closed the door. He went to his window and carefully looked out at the street. Everything looked normal. A few neighbors were walking their dogs, and Mr. Peterson across the street was watering his garden. But Steve kept watching for another 10 minutes, just to make sure the Tung Sahur wasn't out there somewhere. "This is crazy," Steve whispered to himself. "That couldn't have been real. I must have imagined it because I was thinking about the game." But even as he said it, Steve wasn't really convinced. The creature had looked so real, so solid, and those footsteps had been so clear and loud. Steve sat down at his computer and opened his screen recording software. If something weird was going to happen in the game again, he was going to have proof this time. He launched Roblox and joined his private server for STEAL A BRAINROT. The same strange carnival music started playing, and his avatar appeared in the transparent base. Immediately, Steve noticed that the player count showed 2 again. And just like before, he could only see his own avatar on the map. Before Steve even moved toward the conveyor belt, a message appeared in the chat. "Did you miss me so fast?" Steve's hands froze on his keyboard. He hadn't typed anything, and there were no other visible players. But someone had sent that message. Another message appeared. "Why did you run from me earlier today?" Steve's stomach dropped. The other player in the game knew about what had happened in the park. But how was that possible? Steve started his screen recording and carefully moved his avatar toward the conveyor belt. This time, he saw a different brainrot creature, one called Tralalero Tralala. It looked like a grey shark with 4 legs and small sneakers. Its eyes glowed red instead of blue. Steve reached out to click on it, and immediately the voice chat crackled to life. "Leave me alone! You really want to get chased again by a shark?" The voice was the same as before, cold and threatening, but it sounded like a kid. Steve quickly saved his recording and closed the game. His hands were shaking as he uploaded the video file to his phone. Tomorrow, his friends would have to believe him. He had it all on video now. But Steve was also terrified. The voice had mentioned being chased again. It knew about what happened in the park. But the park incident had been in real life, not in the game. How could a player in a Roblox game know about something that happened in the real world? Steve barely slept that night. He kept hearing footsteps outside his window and thinking he saw glowing eyes in the shadows of his room. Every little sound made him jump. The next morning at school, Steve felt exhausted, but he was also excited to finally prove to his friends that he had been telling the truth. At lunch, Steve pulled out his phone and showed the video to Jake, Mike, and Tommy. "Look," Steve said, playing the recording. "You can see there are 2 players in the server, but only my avatar is visible. And listen to this voice chat." His friends watched the video carefully. They could clearly hear the mysterious voice saying, "Leave me alone. You really want to get chased again by a shark?" "Okay," Mike admitted. "That is pretty weird. I've never heard anything like that in the game before." "And look at the player list," Steve pointed out. 2 players, but the second one is just dots. That's not normal. Tommy frowned. "Maybe it's some kind of hacker who figured out how to make themselves invisible. But how did they get into my private server?" Steve asked. "I paid for it with my own Robux." Jake shook his head. "I don't know, man. That's definitely strange. But you also said something about being chased after school yesterday. That's where you lost me." Steve took a deep breath. "I know it sounds crazy, but I saw the Tung Tung Sahur following me in the park. It was huge and real, and it chased me." The 3 friends looked at each other. "Dude," Mike said gently, "Tung Tung Sahur is just a meme. It's not real. Those characters are all made by AI. They're not actual creatures." "I know it sounds impossible," Steve said, "but I'm telling you what I saw, and the voice in the game knew about it." "Okay," Tommy said. "The game thing is weird, and we believe that something strange happened there. But don't come up with stories about seeing game characters in real life, okay? That just makes the whole thing sound made up." Steve felt frustrated again. Even with video evidence, his friends only half believed him. They thought he was exaggerating or imagining the real-world part. "Fine," Steve said. "But I'm telling you, something very strange is happening with this game." After school, Steve walked home more carefully than usual. He kept looking over his shoulder and stayed on the main streets instead of taking shortcuts through the park. But as he got closer to his neighborhood, Steve started hearing multiple sets of footsteps behind him. Not just one pair this time. It sounded like several creatures following him. Steve turned around and saw not 1, but 3 giant brainrot creatures walking behind him. There was the orange Tung Tung Sahur from yesterday, but now it was joined by a grey Tralalero Tralala shark and a purple creature that looked like a cow with alien antennas. All 3 creatures had glowing eyes, blue, red, and green. They were walking slowly but steadily towards Steve, their various sneakers and hooves making different sounds on the pavement. Steve didn't wait to see what they wanted. He started running toward his house as fast as he could. But this time, all 3 creatures began chasing him. Steve could hear the Tung Tung Sahur's footsteps, the Tralalero Tralala's sneakers clicking on the ground, and the cow creature's heavy hooves pounding behind him. Steve ran down a side street and then into another narrow alley. But as he squeezed through the tight space, he could hear the creatures trying to follow. Some of them were too big to fit, but they were making angry growling and roaring sounds. Steve ran through more alleys and finally came out near the old drainage tunnel that ran under Oak Avenue. The tunnel was small and dark, but Steve knew it well from playing there when he was younger. Just as the creatures came around the corner and spotted him, Steve dove into the drainage tunnel. He crawled through the dark, narrow space as fast as he could. While behind him, the creatures tried to squeeze in after him, but they were all too big to fit through the tunnel. Steve could hear them scratching and clawing at the entrance, but they couldn't reach him. Steve stayed in the tunnel for almost an hour until he couldn't hear the creatures anymore. Then he carefully crawled out the other end, which came out near his street. He ran the rest of the way home and burst through his front door. "Steve?" his mum called. Are you okay? You look like you've been running. I'm fine, Mom, Steve said, trying to catch his breath. I just wanted to get some exercise. Well, wash up for dinner. Your dad will be home soon. Steve went upstairs and looked out his bedroom window. The street looked normal again, but Steve wasn't taking any chances. He was going to prove once and for all that this was really happening. The next day at school, Steve told his friends he had bought a body camera online with his birthday money. I'm going to record everything tomorrow, Steve announced. Then you'll see that I'm telling the truth about these creatures. Steve, Jake said seriously, maybe you should talk to a counselor or something. You're really starting to worry us with all this talk about game characters being real. Yeah, Mike agreed. Even if something weird is happening in the game, you can't really believe that cartoon creatures are chasing you in real life. But Tommy looked thoughtful. Actually, he said, my little sister has been having nightmares about those brainrot characters ever since she started watching videos about them online. Maybe there's something about those AI-generated creatures that affects people's minds weird ways. Steve felt a little bit of hope. At least one of his friends was starting to think there might be something unusual going on. Just give me one more day, Steve said. Tomorrow I'll have video proof of everything. That evening, Steve put on his small body camera and made sure it was recording before he even left his school. He walked the same route home from school, but this time he took his usual path through the park. At first, everything seemed normal. Steve was starting to think maybe the creatures wouldn't show up this time. But as he got close to his house, Steve bumped into something big and solid right in front of him. He looked up and saw a giant boneca ambalabu, a creature that looked like a doll with a big spinning wheel around its body. The creature was green, with huge black eyes and a creepy smile. Steve tried to run, but the creature's spinning wheel somehow expanded, trapping Steve inside it. The wheel began to shrink, pressing in on Steve from all sides until he couldn't move. The last thing Steve remembered was the boneca ambalabu's creepy smile as it carried him away. The body camera kept recording until the battery died hours later. Steve never came home that night. His parents called the police, and search teams looked everywhere in the neighborhood. But Steve had simply vanished without a trace. The police found Steve's body camera the next morning in the park. The video showed everything. Steve walking home, bumping into the giant boneca ambalabu, getting trapped in its wheel, and then just darkness. But when the police watched the video, all they saw was Steve walking alone and then suddenly acting like he was trapped by something invisible. To them, it looked like Steve had some kind of mental breakdown and ran off into the woods. Steve's friends heard about his disappearance and remembered all the strange things he had told them. Jake, Mike, and Tommy started to wonder if maybe Steve had been telling the truth all along. What if those creatures were real? Mike said quietly as they sat in the cafeteria. What if something in that game actually made them appear in real life? That's impossible, Jake said, but he didn't sound as confident as usual. Is it? Tommy asked. I mean, Steve had video evidence of weird stuff happening in the game, and now he's missing. That's a pretty big coincidence. The three friends decided they needed to investigate. If something in the game had caused Steve to disappear, maybe they could figure out what happened to him. That evening, Jake logged into Steve's private server using the password Steve had shared with them weeks ago. The server was still active, and Jake could see that there were now 3 other players online. But just like Steve had said, there were no visible avatars anywhere on the map. Jake's username appeared in the server, but the other 3 player slots just showed dots. Jake walked his avatar over to the conveyor belt and saw a tung-tung sahur moving slowly along it. He remembered Steve saying this was the first creature that had talked to him. Jake reached out to click on the tung-tung sahur. Immediately, a voice came through his headphones. "Leave me alone, or I will chase you." But then, Jake heard something else. A second voice, much fainter and more distant. It sounded scared and desperate. Help me, please help me. I'm trapped in here with them. Jake's blood went cold. The second voice sounded exactly like Steve. Jake quickly took a screenshot and then closed the game. His hands were shaking as he called Mike and Tommy. Guys, Jake said when they answered, I think Steve is somehow trapped in the game, and I think we need to help him before we get trapped too. But it might already be too late, because as Jake looked out his bedroom window, he could see glowing eyes watching him from the shadows across the street. And he could swear he heard the sound of sneakers squeaking on the pavement outside his house. The STEAL, a brainrot game, had claimed its first victim. But the brainrot creatures weren't done hunting yet. They had tasted the real world, and now they wanted more players to join their digital prison forever. And somewhere in the code of that cursed private server, Steve was still screaming for help, hoping someone would hear him before it was too late for his friends too. The conveyor belt kept moving, carrying its strange AI creatures round and round in an endless loop. But now it carried something else too. The digital ghost of a boy who had gotten too close to forces he never understood. The game was no longer just about stealing brainrot creatures. Now the creatures were stealing players, one by one, pulling them from the real world into a digital nightmare where escape was impossible. And the worst part was that each new victim would help the creatures become stronger in the real world, until eventually they wouldn't need the game at all. They would be free to hunt anyone, anywhere. The brainrot curse had begun, and no one was safe. I hope everyone enjoyed this story. Let us know in the comments if we should continue it and make a part 2 of this story.